The air in the sterile chamber was heavy with the scent of antiseptic and metal, a sharp contrast to the soft whir of machines that seemed to echo in the otherwise silent room. Outside, the universe continued its unyielding spin, indifferent to the small life-and-death drama playing out in this isolated, high-tech facility. Inside, though, there was nothing but tension. Dr. Jacob Alvarado stood frozen, his breath shallow, staring down at the alien queen before him. She was unlike anything he had ever seen, an imposing figure reduced to a whisper of her former grandeur. Her once proud wings were now mere stumps of ragged tissue, her regal countenance marred by the cold mask of pain that twisted her features. The queen had been betrayed, her own people turning against her in a vicious coup. The gods of war had given her no mercy. Now, as she lay in front of him, vulnerable and broken, Jacob couldn't help but feel a strange sense of duty to the very creature who had waged war across galaxies. But it wasn't just duty that kept him here. It was something deeper. Something he couldn't name. The queen's black, alien eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, there was only silence. Her gaze fixed on Jacob, studying him as though she had never seen a human before. Her lips parted, but only a rasping breath emerged. Jacob's heart ached for her, but he forced himself to remain calm. "You're awake," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos that churned inside him. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, her gaze dropped to her immobile body, the remnants of her wings, and then back to Jacob. A quiet laugh, bitter and hollow, escaped her lips. "I thought they would kill me faster." Jacob clenched his jaw. It was the first time he'd heard her voice, and there was no trace of the regal command that he had read about in the reports. She was a queen, yes, but now she was just a broken woman, no different from any other patient he had treated. "I'm not going to let you die," Jacob said firmly, adjusting the IVs attached to her arm. "Not while I'm here." Her eyes narrowed, skeptical. "You're human," she rasped. "Your species is no friend to mine." Jacob hesitated. It was true. His people had always been caught in the crossfire of the galactic wars between her species and others. Humans had lost countless lives under her reign, and yet, there was something different about this queen. She wasn't the cruel conqueror the stories had painted her to be. In this moment, she was just a person, a broken, betrayed person, and Jacob had a duty to help her, whether he liked it or not. "We're not all the same," Jacob said, his voice quiet but unwavering. "I don't know why they tried to kill you. But I'm not here to take sides. I'm here to make sure you survive." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned her head, looking out the small, high window. Jacob followed her gaze, seeing only the endless expanse of stars, vast and uncaring. "Do you ever wonder," she said softly, "why we fight? Why we conquer and destroy? I once had everything, power, loyalty, a kingdom. But in the end, none of that matters. Not when they turn on you. Not when you're lying here, helpless, and everyone who once revered you is too afraid to even look at you." Jacob swallowed, his fingers tightening on the four. She wasn't just speaking about her physical pain. This was more than that. This was about her soul, her sense of worth. And in that moment, Jacob understood something that shook him to his core. She wasn't just a queen. She was a person. A person who had lost everything. "I don't have the answers for you," Jacob said, his voice softening. "But I'm not leaving you. You're not alone in this." The queen's lips twitched in what might have been a smile, though it was more out of weary resignation than amusement. "You are a strange human," she muttered. "I thought you would fear me, hate me, like all the others." Jacob shook his head. "Fear doesn't help anyone. And I'm not going to hate someone I'm trying to save." She turned her head back toward him, her alien eyes boring into him. For a moment, their gazes locked, two beings from opposite ends of the galaxy, connected by a single, fragile thread of mutual understanding. Then, as quickly as it came, the moment was gone, replaced by the harsh reality of her condition. "I can feel the poison still in my veins," she murmured, her breath ragged. "They tried to kill me slowly. To make me suffer." Jacob's chest tightened at the thought. The Queen's people had gone to great lengths to ensure her suffering, and though the poison had been purged from her body, the effects lingered, leaving her weaker by the hour. He needed to act fast. "I'll take care of it," Jacob said, though the words felt hollow. What could he do, really? She was on the brink of death, and all he had was the knowledge of human medicine. Her body was nothing like his own. But there was no choice. The Queen exhaled slowly, her eyelids fluttering shut. "You're wasting your time," she whispered, so quietly Jacob had to lean in to hear her. "Even if you save me, there will be nothing left for me. Nothing but a lifetime of betrayal." Jacob's fingers hesitated on the medical console, his mind racing. He wanted to say something, anything, that would reassure her. But he couldn't. Instead, he chose to remain silent, focusing on the task at hand. There was no room for uncertainty now. If he was going to save her, he had to believe it was possible. No matter how impossible it seemed. And yet, as he adjusted the controls and worked to stabilize her, something shifted in the air. A quiet but powerful connection, one forged not by duty, but by something deeper, something more human. He wasn't just trying to save her from death. He was trying to save her from the darkness that had consumed her soul. And that, in itself, felt like a battle worth fighting. The door to the medical chamber slammed open, and the harsh sound echoed against the sterile walls. Jacob's pulse quickened, his hands freezing mid-motion as the beeping of the medical monitor seemed to speed up in time with his heartbeat. "Step aside, human!" A deep voice barked, its tone carrying an edge that made the air in the room feel heavier. The speaker, a tall, armored figure with gleaming silver plating and a visor that reflected the dim lights, towered in the doorway. Behind him, two other soldiers, equally imposing, flanked the entrance, weapons at the ready. Jacob's muscles tensed instinctively, though he didn't step away from the Queen's bedside. He couldn't. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. "I told you," Jacob said, his voice cold but steady. "I'm not leaving her." The armored figure's eyes narrowed, the electronic hum of his helmet amplifying the tension in the room. "You misunderstand, human. This is not a request." The Queen, lying unconscious but still alive, stirred faintly at the disturbance. Jacob shot a quick glance at her, his mind racing. She couldn't afford another shock. She couldn't survive another attack, even one of words. "Do you want her to die?" Jacob's voice was low, deliberate, carrying the weight of the question. The soldier took a step forward, the heavy boots clanking on the floor. "We came here to ensure she does not survive." The words hit Jacob like a slap in the face. He had heard rumors, of course, rumors of assassination attempts, political betrayals, but hearing it spoken so directly left him breathless with the shock of it. "You're not killing her," Jacob snapped, moving to stand between the soldiers and the Queen. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "She's not some trophy for you to claim." The soldier hesitated, as if unsure how to react to this bold human who dared challenge him. The second soldier, more agitated, adjusted the grip on his rifle, but the leader's raised hand stopped him. "I told you," the leader said, lowering his voice. "This is a matter of galactic peace. Her existence threatens everything." Jacob's eyes darkened, his mind spinning. "Peace? Is that what you call it? Murdering the one person who—" He stopped himself, realizing how far he had gone, how much of his emotions he had already exposed. The soldier didn't need to know that Jacob had started to care. He couldn't afford to show weakness, not now. The leader's helmet tilted slightly, a sign of interest, or perhaps disdain. "You're a fool, human. Her people want her dead. You think your petty medical expertise can save her?" Jacob's heart raced in his chest, but he refused to be intimidated. "I don't need to save her for you," he said, his tone hardening. "I'm doing this for her. You have no idea what she's been through, what they did to her." The leader took another step forward, forcing Jacob to take a half step back, but he didn't falter. "I am not here to listen to your excuses, human. I am here to finish what we started." Jacob's breath hitched. He could see the resolve in the soldier's eyes, This wasn't just a threat, this was a mandate. Then you'll have to kill me first, Jacob said, his voice thick with defiance. For a moment, there was nothing but silence in the room. The Queen, still unconscious, was the only one unaware of the looming confrontation. The soldiers waited, their stances rigid and unwavering, as if daring Jacob to challenge them further. Then, a soft voice broke through the tension, quiet but firm. Enough. The voice belonged to the Queen. Jacob's head snapped to the side, his breath catching as her eyes opened slowly, glowing faintly in the dim light. The soldiers froze, their eyes darting to her in disbelief. Even the leader took an involuntary step back. You're awake, Jacob whispered, his throat tight with relief. His heart hammered in his chest, but he couldn't tear his gaze away from her. I am, the Queen replied, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it held a force that could not be ignored. She turned her head toward the soldiers, her expression cold but resolute. Leave. The soldiers hesitated, looking between the Queen and Jacob as if unsure of how to proceed. The leader finally straightened, his armored frame imposing, but even he could not ignore the commanding presence of the Queen. Your orders, Your Majesty? He asked, though there was no mistaking the edge of reluctance in his voice. The Queen's eyes flicked to Jacob, and for a fleeting moment, there was something in her gaze, something soft, almost human, that caught him off guard. Then, she looked back at the soldiers, her lips curling into a faint, grim smile. My orders are that you leave, she repeated, each word laced with finality. And if you value your life, you will obey. Jacob watched as the soldiers hesitated one last time before, one by one, they backed out of the room, leaving only the soft hum of the medical equipment and the fading echo of their boots on the floor. Once they were gone, Jacob exhaled in a shaky breath, his body finally relaxing as the adrenaline ebbed away. His heart was still racing, but now it was from the sheer intensity of the moment, and something more. The Queen's eyes were still on him. She had been saved, for now, but the tension between them was palpable. She had ordered the soldiers to leave, but what did that mean for their fragile alliance? Was she thanking him for standing in her way, or was she merely a calculating ruler using him to her advantage? I told you, she said, her voice softer now, though no less commanding. I don't need saving. Jacob met her gaze, his breath slow and deliberate. Maybe not. But I'm not leaving until I'm sure you're safe. She watched him carefully, as though sizing him up, and then her lips twisted in a smile that didn't reach her eyes, but one that still held an undeniable power. Then, it seems, we have more in common than I thought. Jacob didn't know how long he had been standing there, staring at the Queen. The room was eerily quiet now, the soft hum of machines the only sound that seemed to fill the air. His heart still raced from the encounter with the soldiers, but it was the silent weight of the Queen's presence that kept him rooted in place. The tension between them had shifted. Now it wasn't just about her survival. It was about power, and trust, and something deeper that neither of them could fully name. The Queen, despite her weakened state, seemed unfazed by the confrontation. Her gaze, sharp and calculating, never left his face. The faintest of smiles curled her lips, but it wasn't the kind of smile that offered warmth. No, it was the smile of someone who had learned to hide their pain behind a mask of control. Do you ever get tired of playing the hero? She asked, her voice barely more than a rasp, but carrying a sharpness that belied her fragile form. Jacob's eyes flickered toward her, a frown tugging at his brow. I'm not trying to be a hero. I'm trying to keep you alive. And why? She asked, her voice still thick with suspicion. Is it pity? Or do you think you can somehow change the course of history by saving me? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he moved closer to her bed, adjusting the IVs and checking the various monitors that kept her alive. There was something raw in her question, something that made him pause. Was he trying to change history? Or was he simply trying to save a life, even if it wasn't the one he had imagined saving? I don't know, he said finally, his voice quiet but earnest. Maybe I'm just doing what I think is right. She watched him, her alien eyes piercing, yet holding something akin to curiosity. And what if doing the right thing means betraying your own people? Jacob's fingers froze on the console, his chest tightening. He had asked himself that very question more times than he cared to admit. The humans had been at war with her species for years. His loyalty should lie with his own kind, but somehow, that felt less certain every day he spent in her presence. What if it doesn't? He replied, his voice softer now. What if what's right isn't as simple as sides and flags? Her expression softened for a moment, and Jacob could have sworn he saw a flicker of understanding pass between them. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the cold, calculating demeanor of a queen who had survived betrayal after betrayal. You're playing a dangerous game, she said, her tone tinged with something like warning. And you don't even know the rules. I don't care about the rules. Jacob shot back, surprising himself with the fierceness in his own voice. I care about keeping you alive. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the faint beeping of the medical equipment. Jacob could feel her gaze still on him, weighing him, testing him. He didn't know what she saw when she looked at him, but he was starting to believe that the Queen didn't just see a human doctor. She saw something else, something more dangerous. You have no idea what it's like, she said quietly, her voice distant now, as though lost in thought. To be betrayed by everyone you've ever known. To have everything you fought for crumble in an instant. Her eyes flickered toward the ceiling, distant and hollow. I had an empire, you know. I ruled worlds. But none of that matters now. Not when your own people abandon you. Jacob's stomach tightened. He had heard the stories, the rumors about the Queen's rise to power and her brutal reign. The galaxy trembled at her name, and for good reason. But hearing her speak like this, with a rawness that defied her imposing reputation, made him see her in an entirely new light. She wasn't just a queen. She was a person who had lost everything, and in the process, had become a shadow of her former self. He felt a pang of sympathy, but he quickly shoved it down. She's still the enemy, he reminded himself, still the one who has caused suffering. And yet, standing here in the dim light of the medical chamber, he couldn't deny the strange connection that was beginning to form between them. You're not alone anymore, Jacob said, his voice more certain than he felt. He leaned over her, adjusting the fluids running into her veins. You have me. I won't leave you. The Queen's lips curled again, but this time it wasn't a smile. It was something more cynical, more resigned. You're a fool, human. You think you can change me? Save me? You'll regret it. I've seen countless soldiers fall, and I've watched empires burn. I've seen what happens to those who think they can save the galaxy from itself. Jacob bristled at the challenge in her tone. Then why are you still here? Why are you still alive? Her eyes met his, and for a long moment, they simply stared at each other, the weight of her words hanging between them. Because you're not the first fool to think they can save me, she said finally, her voice low and dangerous. And you won't be the last. Jacob felt a shiver crawl down his spine. The Queen wasn't just a victim here, she was a survivor. And she had her own reasons for living, for continuing, even after everything had been ripped away from her. He wasn't sure if he was a part of those reasons, but for better or worse, he was entangled in this web now. Before he could respond, a soft chime echoed through the room, breaking the fragile tension between them. Jacob glanced at the monitor, his heart skipping a beat. Something was wrong. The readout on the screen flickered, and then the alarms began to blare. Jacob's eyes widened. The Queen's vitals were crashing. The blaring alarms were deafening, reverberating in the sterile, white-walled room. Jacob's hands were a blur of motion as he worked frantically, his fingers dancing over the console, trying to stabilize the Queen's rapidly failing vitals. The screen flashed red, an alarming cascade of error codes flashing in his peripheral vision. He hadn't expected this, hadn't prepared for it. The Queen was supposed to be stable. She had been stable. Her breathing was shallow, ragged. Her skin was deathly pale, the faint glow of her once imposing presence flickering like a dying star. Jacob's pulse quickened, his heart thudding in his chest. He had saved countless lives in his career, but this was different. This was the Queen, an alien monarch who had once ruled entire worlds, now reduced to nothing more than a fragile, dying patient on his watch. You have to stop this. Her voice rasped, weak but demanding. You can't save me. His hands hovered over the medical console, torn between pushing forward and accepting the impossible truth that was slowly settling in his chest. But he couldn't give up, not now, not when he had promised her survival. Don't talk like that, he snapped, his voice hoarse with frustration and fear. I won't let you die. Her eyes flickered open, that same intense, cold gaze fixed on him. She was still a queen, even in this state, commanding, regal, but her eyes held something else now. It was raw, vulnerable, a depth of understanding Jacob hadn't expected to see. She was afraid, and for the first time, he realized that the great and powerful queen wasn't just a force of nature, but someone who had reached the edge of her endurance. I am already dead in the eyes of my people, she whispered. But your people, what will they think of you? You can't erase what's been done. You can't undo the wars, the bloodshed, the betrayal. Her words were like shards of ice piercing his resolve, but he fought back the wave of guilt crashing over him. I don't care what they think. I care about you. Her laugh was dry, without humor. You care about me? Or you care about the illusion of saving me? This isn't some story where the hero saves the day. This is real. And real people, real soldiers, real worlds suffer. Jacob's heart clenched. He knew. He had seen it. He had been there when entire cities were bombed, when people screamed for mercy. But none of that felt like the whole truth anymore. The line between right and wrong had blurred, and he didn't know where he stood anymore. Not with her. Not with the galaxy hanging in the balance. Her breaths were growing more erratic, and Jacob's hands flew to the controls again, a mixture of panic and determination warring within him. I'm not letting you go, he muttered, almost to himself. He could feel the cold sweat on his brow as he adjusted the settings, trying to buy them both more time. But the data on the screen only worsened. Her blood pressure was dropping. Oxygen levels were plummeting. The monitors blinked erratically, and the pit in his stomach deepened with each passing second. Jacob, she breathed, her voice weak, barely audible now. You can't save me. He froze for a moment, his heart sinking, knowing exactly what she meant. You can't fix what's broken. She was right. This wasn't a simple battle to be won with machines or medicine. It was about something far more profound, far more complicated. But he couldn't accept that. I will save you, he said firmly, though his voice wavered with the weight of doubt pressing in on him. Her hand reached out, trembling, as she grasped his wrist. You can't change history with good intentions, Jacob. I am the consequence of all that's been done. I cannot be healed. The tension in the room thickened. Jacob felt his breath catch in his throat, the pull of her words like gravity, drawing him into a place he wasn't sure he could come back from. She was right. He knew it, deep in his bones. And yet, as he stared down at her, the once mighty ruler now broken and fragile in front of him, his desire to save her outweighed any sense of logic. He wasn't sure if it was love or guilt or something deeper still, but in that moment, something in him snapped. He couldn't walk away. Not yet. Not while she was still breathing. But then, her grip tightened, pulling him closer. Her breath was shallow, her skin cold to the touch. Listen to me, she rasped, each word a struggle. You think you can change me. But what if I'm the reason you'll lose everything? Your people. Your life. Your humanity. Jacob's mind raced. Lose everything? The weight of her words pressed down on him like a vice, suffocating the thoughts that tried to fight their way to the surface. He was already losing everything, wasn't he? The war, the betrayals, the alliances broken, the lines crossed. Wasn't that what she was trying to tell him? That no matter what he did, the world they both inhabited was doomed? I choose to save you, he said, the words more forceful than he intended. Because I believe it's worth it. I believe you are worth it. Her eyes softened for just a moment. A flicker of something, almost like relief, passed over her face. But it was brief, gone almost as quickly as it came. Then the doors to the medical base slid open with a hiss, and a team of soldiers stormed in. Jacob barely had time to react as they began to drag him away from the Queen's side. "No!" he shouted, but his voice barely carried above the noise of the alarms. The soldiers didn't listen. One of them, a commander with a face he recognized from earlier, approached the Queen's bed, his expression cold. "She's beyond saving," the commander said, voice matter-of-fact. "The orders are clear. No one survives this war, not even her." Jacob's heart stopped. The betrayal was complete. And now, he had to make a choice.